We've all been there, haven't we? That initial rush of connection, feeling like something special is kicking off.
Yeah, absolutely.
But, the reality is not all love stories, well, they don't all keep climbing.
Mm-hmm.
So today we're getting into something natural, but often pretty difficult.
Yeah,
That point when the love sort of fades.
exactly. And understanding this shift, knowing how to spot it, and then figuring out how to navigate it, that can be really, really insightful.
Right.
And our guides for this exploration are Tai Van Lien and Thuy Minh from their really open chat on, Viet said it was Yulon SS2EP1.
Precisely. We've got Van Lean, the businesswoman, sharp investor's mind,
Yeah.
and through Min, who brings these really personal reflections on relationships.
Mm-hmm.
So our mission, let's say, for this deep dive is to pull out their key insights, like how do you know love's waning? How do you make those really tough calls about the future?
And crucially, how do you move on afterwards?
Ex-
What I find really interesting here is how Van Lean keeps drawing these lines between, business strategies and the, let's face it, often unpredictable world of romance.
Okay, let's dive right into that. That surprising connection between business and relationships. Van Lean really pushes this idea of needing preparation, even strategy in a partnership. You can really hear her business background coming through.
Yeah, and what's fascinating is her point about hard skills in those first, say, 6 months,
Right.
really getting to grips with each other's history, personal life. It's almost exactly like due diligence in investing, isn't it?
It really is. You're
There's that.
checking the fundamentals before you commit big.
Exactly. And if you skip that part, well, the risk of problems down the line just skyrockets. They actually mention that.
And that early honesty, being upfront about your past, your non-negotiables. Van Lean's examples, what were they? Her pick and her husband's kill.
That's it.
It shows that perfectly, just get it all out there early to avoid hitting those walls later.
Which, leads to that pretty startling statistic they brought up.
Oh, yeah.
Over 70% of divorces linked to not enough commitment and, crucially, not enough deep talk before getting married.
Wow, 70%.
It just hammers home how vital that initial hard skills phase is. It's almost like prevention.
Okay, now what about this withdrawal strategy idea? In investing, it's clear, cut your losses on a bad asset.
Right.
But Van Lin admits applying that straight to marriage, which is ideally forever, well, it's more complicated.
It is. But if you think about the principle behind it, adapting your approach based on stages and needs,
Okay.
her analogy about managing a portfolio, but with children, kind of works.
How so?
Well, different investments need different handling, right?
Yeah.
Same with people in a family.
Hmm.
Sometimes withdrawal just means giving someone space, adapting.
Ah, I see. Giving space. And that idea of mutual growth being so important.
Absolutely essential.
Yeah.
If partners aren't growing, maybe not in the exact same way, but alongside each other.
They just drift apart.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
It shows that keeping a relationship healthy takes constant work, constant adaptation, like running a business, really.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit to the core topic, the actual end of love and those decisions that come with it.
The tough part.
Yeah. Van Lean brings back that withdrawal idea, but more directly for relationships. Recognizing when it's, well, time to exit an emotional investment that's just not paying off anymore.
Mm-hmm. And Thuy Minh's story about bouncing back pretty quickly from a breakup when she was younger is interesting there.
How so?
That feeling of having a whole future ahead, lots of possibilities. It acted like a cushion, made the recovery faster.
Which is a real contrast to Van Lean ending a relationship because, well, she admits now it was immaturity. Hating his smoking was the deal breaker then.
Right. It just shows how our priorities, our relationship compass really changes over time, doesn't it?
Totally. And Thuy Minh's funny story about nearly breaking up over a forgotten birthday plan.
Yeah, that was great.
It highlights how those early insecurities, like who loves more, reading into tiny things, they often fade a bit with age and experience.
You get a bit more perspective, hopefully.
Yeah. Now, the timing of leaving, that came up as really significant. Thurman mentioned women sometimes maybe delaying that decision.
Right. And that potentially just leads to more pain, more wasted time, essentially.
So it brings up that big question. When do you know it's really over?
Mm-hmm.
Van Lean realizing after 5 years that a relationship just wasn't right and making that hard choice. It sounds like the business idea of cutting your losses again.
It does. Difficult, but sometimes necessary for the long run.
And then there's that idea, maybe a bit stereotypical, but you hear it, that men might change less fundamentally over time.
Yeah, that came up.
which kind of puts more pressure on women to be really sure about their long-term decisions.
It's definitely something to think about how different growth rates or directions in a partnership can affect things long term.
Mm.
Compatibility isn't static.
Okay, so what about after? The aftermath of Yahoo? That feeling of emptiness, the fear of the unknown. It's huge for many people.
It really is. Van Leen talked about consciously choosing to be independent sometimes after relationships ended. She saw it as building a crucial life skill, a hard skill.
That's a good way to frame it. Seeing the void not as emptiness, but as like potential space.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Fertile ground for growing yourself, figuring things out, building a stronger foundation just for you.
And practically having things like work, friends, travel, those become anchors, don't they?
Hugely important for healing. Of course, as Thuyen pointed out, it gets way more complicated with kids involved.
Oh, definitely. Communication, co-parenting, that becomes the absolute focus.
But Van Leen had a strong take on this too.
Which was?
That ending a loveless relationship, even with kids, is ultimately better for everyone involved, adults and children, even if it's really hard at first.
That's a big statement.
Well, think about the long term. What kids see between their parents, that shapes their whole idea of love and partnership, right?
Yeah, that's true. You're modeling relationships for them.
Exactly.
Okay, so how do you actually spot the signs? Those little shifts that mean love is fading? Van Leen had a very personal one,
Right. She mentioned noticing she was attracted to other men.
which apparently just didn't happen when she was deeply in love.
And she contrasted that with maybe a more typical male focus on just sexual attraction, perhaps.
Interesting. What else?
Well, the shift in perspective, like when you're really happy and invested, thinking about other people just feels irrelevant, a waste of brain space.
Yeah, I get that.
So the red flag is when suddenly those other potential partners do start looking attractive. That can be a big signal something's changed internally.
It's like the opposite of business, where looking at external opportunities is usually good. Here, the internal shift is the warning sign.
Precisely. And then there's that insecurity creeping in, wondering who loves more. That impulse to maybe leave first before you get left.
Ah, the ego getting involved. It's human, but painful.
Speaks to how vulnerable we feel in these connections.
Okay, let's talk boundaries. Forgiveness, non-negotiables. Van Leen seems very clear on hers.
Yeah, she drew some hard lines.
Yeah.
No third parties, no physical abuse. For her, those are relationship enders. No forgiveness possible there.
But the reality, as they acknowledged, is that some people do stay, even after infidelity or abuse.
It's incredibly complex, isn't it?
Ah.
So many factors influence those decisions. It's not always straightforward.
But Van Leen suggested that maybe with age, with more experience, you might boil it down to just one key question. Your ultimate breaking point becomes clearer.
Yeah, maybe. And certainly repeated bad behavior, like abuse, just removes all doubt. It clarifies the need to leave for your own safety, your own well-being.
Right. So moving away from like profit and loss, how do you measure the value in a relationship?
Van Leen had a nice take here. She equated effort with profit.
Effort.
Yeah, those small, consistent things. Gestures of care, attention, like giving a back rub, just talking properly.
Like making deposits in the emotional bank account, someone once said?
Exactly that. Small, steady investments showing you're present, you're engaged.
Okay, what about preparing for the possibility of, hey you, prenups came up?
They did. As a legal tool, mostly for dividing assets if things end. Less common in Vietnam, apparently.
Right, more for people bringing significant assets into the marriage already.
Yeah, but the principle behind it, thinking ahead about potential issues like you would in a detailed investment contract, that idea has value.
And it's not just legal stuff, is it? Van Leen shared her approach with her husband.
Right, that 30-year life plan they did together.
Yeah, to understand each other's goals, how to support them, and reading that book, his needs, her needs.
That's the one. The idea there is to really figure out what each partner needs most in the relationship. Respect, trust, affection, it varies.
Okay, so you identify those top needs.
And then you actively, consciously work to meet your partner's top needs. That's the strategy for keeping the love alive, according to the book.
Needs like dedicated attention, physical touch.
Yeah.
Could be anything, really.
Yeah, and the key is focusing on their top needs, even if they're different from yours.
And checking in regularly, because needs can change.
Absolutely crucial. Reassessing, talking openly about what you want, even if it feels awkward at first. Because unmet expectations, that's a huge driver of falling out of love.
Okay, so wrapping up, moving forward after the decision is made. What's key then?
Trusting yourself, your decision,
Yeah.
being really honest with yourself to avoid that what-if regret later.
And accepting the pain, knowing it's temporary.
Yes, focusing on the future. And also tackling those societal pressures, the personal fears about breaking up, especially if you're older.
Recognizing you don't need a partner to be happy or fulfilled. Finding joy elsewhere.
Exactly. Hobbies, friends, work, contributing.
Okay.
And that powerful idea. Self-love is the one love that shouldn't end.
Is there maybe a slight upside to breakups later in life? Less drama, maybe. More perspective.
Potentially less intense emotional chaos, yeah. But then, as I said, the practical stuff, money, kids that can weigh heavier.
Van Laney's point about not actively prepping for the end, to avoid making it happen. That was interesting.
Yeah, but instead focusing on being independent, financially secure. That's her form of preparedness.
It links back to self-confidence, doesn't it?
Totally. Insecurity breeds negativity. A confident investor, as she put it, moves on to the next opportunity with belief in themselves.
Right. It all comes back to that Yulon idea. Finding peace, well-being in your heart.
Exactly. Finding that balance.
So, wrapping up this deep dive on Hoyu, drawing from that Vietcetera chat, we've seen those interesting business parallels, the tough journey of spotting fading love, making choices.
And how crucial self-awareness and personal growth are in dealing with the aftermath.
We've also touched on practical things like the signs, boundaries, forgiveness.
And that proactive idea of understanding and meeting needs in the relationship.
So here's a final thought for you listening. Thinking about your own experiences, your own relationships that have changed. How do you personally balance that logical side, knowing something isn't working, with the emotional difficulty of letting go? What from our chat today really hit home for you?
It's definitely something to reflect on personally.
Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive.
Yeah, we hope it's given you some things to think about.
We'll be back soon, maybe digging into shun you, that feeling of being bored with love from another Yulon talk. Until then, take good care.